the far western edge of the ancient European continent, rising from the heart of the stormy Atlantic Ocean, lies an island that has proudly held on to its lush green beauty for thousands of years. They call it the Emerald Isle. Ireland may not have the grand Renaissance architecture of Italy, nor the restless, never-sleeping energy of America's great cities. Instead, it possesses a far gentler kind of power: the spirit of the land, the breath of the sea, and above all, the heartbeat of people who see sincerity and community as a way of life. So, why is that? The way of life of the people living in this hidden green gem on the edge of Europe may offer the most compelling answer. Mornings on Ireland's west coast tend to begin slowly, as nature itself seems to have never been in a hurry. Thin layers of mist still hover over green fields stretching all the way to the horizon. In the distance, flocks of sheep graze leisurely beside hand-built stone walls that have stood for generations. The wind blowing in from the Atlantic carries the salty air through gray stone houses, across open fields, and along narrow country roads barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Behind this picture-perfect scenery lies more than just the beauty of an island famous for its endless shades of green. It is also home to more than 5 million people who have learned to live with rain, wind, and the isolation of an island nation on the western edge of Europe. The Atlantic Ocean has done more than shape Ireland's distinctive climate. It has influenced nearly every aspect of daily life. Winters are rarely bitterly cold, and summers are seldom unbearably hot. Instead, light showers can appear without warning, keeping the grasslands green for much of the year. These natural conditions helped make Ireland one of the earliest places in Europe to develop a strong livestock farming tradition. Dairy cattle, sheep, and open pastures are more than postcard images. For centuries, they have been the livelihood of tens of thousands of families. And yet, what truly defines this country lies in the way its people remain connected to their communities. In Ireland, small towns and rural villages are still at the heart of social life. While Dublin continues to grow and thrive, much of Ireland's identity is preserved in communities of just a few hundred or a few thousand residents. And to understand Ireland, we begin with these quiet, unassuming villages. Away from the main roads, Ireland reveals an entirely different world. Small towns nestle among green pastures, with clusters of stone buildings surrounding churches, grocery stores, and local pubs. A community may have only a few hundred households, yet it often functions like one big family. A new day often begins before dawn. Around 6 in the morning, lights are already glowing on the farms. Farmers check on their cattle before the sun comes up. The steady hum of milking machines fills the barns, in a routine that has changed very little over generations. Meanwhile, in the heart of the village, the bakery has already been firing up its ovens while the sky is still dark. Traditional loaves of soda bread, freshly baked pastries, and sweet treats begin coming out of the oven one after another. Before long, locals stop in for breakfast, taking a few minutes to catch up before heading off to work. What's fascinating is that many of the encounters Irish people have throughout the day are completely unplanned. They meet wherever they happen to cross paths, sometimes even stopping their cars in the middle of the road just to exchange a few words. In a big city, that might cause a traffic jam. But in an Irish village, it's simply part of everyday life. That sense of connection becomes especially clear when someone is going through a difficult time. If a family has someone who is ill, neighbors take turns bringing over home-cooked meals. When a powerful storm tears the roof off a house, the first people to show up are often not emergency crews, but the neighbors living right around the corner. In Ireland, community spirit isn't a slogan. It's simply a way of life. Everyday life in the Irish countryside moves at an almost remarkable pace, as though time itself has willingly slowed down at the doorstep of every home. The sun may not have fully risen yet, but many kitchens are already glowing with warm light. The kettle whistles inside an old stone house. A hot cup of tea is poured before someone pulls on a rain jacket, slips into a pair of rubber boots, and steps outside. On dairy farms, the work carries on with the same steady rhythm, whether the day brings sunshine or rain. For many families, the tradition has been passed down through 3 or 4 generations. The morning begins with the rich aroma of traditional soda bread, made without yeast and instead risen with baking soda, carrying the comforting flavors of buttermilk and barley. Rural schools are often small, with classrooms that may have just a little over a dozen students. These schools do more than teach academic lessons. They also serve as gathering places for concerts, festivals, charity fundraisers, and village meetings. When the school day ends, children run out onto Gaelic football fields, help their parents gather hay, or feed the sheep. It is how they learn responsibility from an early age. Summer is a crucial season for Irish farmers. Whenever the rain finally gives way, everyone makes the most of every precious hour of sunshine to cut the grass, dry it, and roll it into large bales for the winter months. If one family needs to get the harvest in before the next rainstorm arrives, neighbors will drive over with their tractors to lend a hand. This spirit of mutual support has been around for generations, long before modern machinery ever appeared on Irish farms. As the sun begins to sink, the small country roads grow busier once again. This is the hour when everyone is making their way home after a day's work. The sound of children playing ball carries across the local sports field. A few people take their dogs for a walk. Elderly residents trim the hedges outside their homes. Smoke begins rising from chimneys as families prepare dinner. It is a scene that unfolds almost every day, quietly and steadily. There is something quite fascinating about Ireland. Across the country are specially protected regions known as Gaelic areas, where Gaeilge, the traditional Irish language, remains a living part of everyday life. Gaeilge is one of the oldest written languages in Western Europe. Every word and every turn of phrase carries echoes of the worldview of the ancient Celtic people. In Irish, rather than saying, "I am sad," one might express the idea as, "Sadness is upon me." The language treats emotion as something that visits us like a passing wave, rather than something that defines us forever. A remarkably profound and deeply human way of seeing the world. What is especially remarkable is that most people in Gaeltacht communities do not try to turn their culture into a performance for tourists. They are simply living the way they always have. Step into a local pub, and visitors may be surprised by how different it feels from the pubs they have known elsewhere. There are no grand stages or dazzling lights. Just a few people with fiddles, an accordion, or a wooden flute. One person starts playing, and then another joins in. Most importantly, these performances are not really for an audience. The music happens because people simply want to share an evening together. In Ireland, many traditions have survived in precisely this natural way. However, preserving a culture has never been easy. For decades, more and more young people have left their hometowns in search of education and employment in larger cities or abroad. Some villages are now home to little more than an aging population. The number of children continues to decline. A few schools have had to merge because there are no longer enough students. And as the population shrinks, the language itself faces the risk of fading away. Because a language does not disappear when the elderly pass away. It disappears when children stop using it. That is why many Gaeltacht communities have taken active steps to encourage young people to stay. They have developed small-scale community tourism, promoted remote work, opened cultural centers, and organized Irish language courses for both locals and visitors. What they want to preserve is more than just a language. It is an entire way of life, a community where people still call each other by name, still know each other's families, still gather together to sing the old songs in the pub every weekend. And that is how Ireland has entered the modern age without losing touch with its roots. Yet, for these villages to continue thriving, tradition alone is not enough. people must also find a way to balance preserving their identity with building an economy in a world that changes every day. Today, Ireland is home to the European headquarters of many of the world's leading technology and pharmaceutical companies. Dublin has become one of the region's most dynamic business hubs, where modern glass buildings line the River Liffey and thousands of engineers and professionals from around the world work side by side. And yet, what is fascinating is that this growth has not completely separated itself from rural life. Instead, these two seemingly opposite worlds continue to coexist and support one another. In the countryside, agriculture remains a vital foundation of everyday life. Ireland's mild climate and year-round green pastures have helped make it renowned for dairy and sheep farming. What is especially valuable is that even as technology and machinery continue to advance, many family farms still maintain a manageable scale rather than expanding aggressively, because quality remains their highest priority. Agriculture is not the only source of livelihood. The sea also sustains many communities along Ireland's Atlantic coast. Gaelic. In small fishing villages, boats still leave the harbor before dawn. Fishermen bring in crab, lobster, mackerel, and other seasonal seafood. When they return, the catch is sold at local markets or delivered to restaurants throughout the region. In recent years, many rural communities in Ireland have also discovered new opportunities through community-based tourism. Families are opening their farms to visitors, offering them the chance to feed sheep, learn how to milk cows, bake traditional soda bread, or simply sit down over a cup of tea and listen to stories about the village. For local people, this is more than just an additional source of income. More importantly, it is an opportunity to show the world how they truly live, rather than simply showcasing a collection of scenic attractions. And what makes Ireland even more special is its remarkably fresh and wholesome food culture. In the south of Ireland, County Cork is widely regarded as the country's culinary capital. Irish cuisine was once misunderstood as plain and repetitive, revolving almost entirely around potatoes. But a visit to Cork may completely change that impression. Walking into the English Market, a historic food market in Cork dating back to 1788, feels like stepping into a sensory paradise. The aroma of artisan cheese, the briny scent of fresh seafood, and the warm fragrance of freshly baked bread mingle together in the air. Be sure to try Irish stew, a traditional dish of slow-cooked lamb and potatoes. Simple as it may be, it carries the warmth of home. Simmered for hours until the lamb becomes wonderfully tender. Or simply enjoy a freshly shucked oyster along the coast of Kinsale and taste the deep sweetness and pristine freshness of Ireland's Atlantic waters. Romania. Ireland's mild climate and year-round green pastures provide the country with ingredients that its people have long taken pride in. Dairy is one of Ireland's most important products. On family farms, fresh milk is turned into butter, cheese, and yogurt, each with its own rich, distinctive flavor. Many families still preserve traditional recipes for making butter or aging cheese, passed down through generations and cherished as part of their family's heritage. Along the coast, seafood becomes the soul of the dinner table. Fishing boats return each morning carrying freshly caught crab, lobster, oysters, salmon, and mackerel. Many small restaurants near the harbors hardly need a fixed menu, because what they serve that day depends entirely on what the sea has brought in that morning. The Irish do not try to hide the natural flavors of their ingredients beneath heavy seasoning. They believe the finest food is food that still tastes of the land and the sea it came from. Because every dish does more than nourish the body. It also preserves memories of the land, the community, and the way of life that has shaped the identity of this island. People often call Ireland the Island of Green, but for those who have lived here all their lives, that green has never been something to take for granted. In the West, where towering cliffs plunge into the sea and fields end almost at the water's edge, people have long been accustomed to weather that can change dramatically within a matter of hours. A morning begins beneath the soft glow of sunlight. By midday, dark clouds roll in, bringing sudden showers. Then, by afternoon, the skies clear once again, as though no storm had ever passed through. This unpredictable weather has become an inseparable part of life in Ireland. Yet in recent years, even those who have grown accustomed to rain and wind have begun to notice the changes in nature. Atlantic storms are arriving with greater intensity. Prolonged heavy rainfall leaves fields waterlogged, while unusually long dry spells can reduce the quality of the grasslands. For a country whose livestock industry depends so heavily on natural pasture, this is far from a minor change. Many farmers say they now have to adjust planting schedules, store more feed for their animals, and invest more heavily in drainage systems to cope with increasingly unpredictable weather. In coastal villages, shoreline erosion has also become a growing concern. Some roads that once sat dozens of meters from the sea now edge a little closer to the waves with every passing year. For many communities, climate change is no longer an abstract concept seen on television. It is happening right outside their front doors. Alongside the challenges brought by nature are the changes of modern society. Like many other European countries, Ireland is experiencing a steady movement of people from rural areas toward larger cities. Young people leave home to attend university and pursue careers in technology, finance, healthcare, and other fields. Not everyone comes back. In many villages, the number of children has gradually declined year after year. Some schools have had to merge because there are no longer enough students. A few family-run shops that have served their communities for decades have also been forced to close when their owners retire without anyone to take over. It is a slow-moving change, but one that is becoming increasingly difficult for people to ignore as their communities grow a little smaller with each passing year. And yet, rather than simply accepting this decline, many communities have begun finding new ways forward. Farms are adding agricultural experiences for visitors. Families are renovating old homes into guest houses and homestays. More young people are choosing to work remotely for companies in Dublin or overseas while continuing to live in their hometowns. High-speed internet allows them to join meetings with clients on the other side of the world, and, just minutes later, step outside to help their parents check on the cattle. The combination of technology and rural life is opening a new path forward for many parts of Ireland. Not to turn them into cities, but to give young people more reasons to stay. So, what is it that gives this rainy, windswept island, with all its challenges, such a powerful hold over the people who call it home? The answer is simple. This is a place built around values that are increasingly difficult to find elsewhere. In Ireland, home has never been simply the place where you were born. It is where every road is tied to a memory. It is the first school you ever attended. The field where your father taught you how to guide a flock of sheep. The harbor where your grandfather once returned from every trip out to sea. The pub where familiar faces gather every weekend, waiting for one another over the sound of traditional folk music. That sense of connection is nurtured by a community where people still make time for one another. If a family is going through a difficult time, the neighbors are the first to knock on their door. If a storm tears down a fence or damages a barn, people will come together to help without anyone having to ask. If there is a wedding, a festival, or even a funeral in the village, the whole community shows up. In many parts of the world, people can live side by side for years without ever knowing their neighbors' names. But in the villages of Ireland, people don't just know each other's names, they know each other's stories. These are things you cannot simply take with you when you move to another city. They exist only in the place where you truly belong. Perhaps that is why so many Irish people, even after living far from home for decades, still call their little village home. That deep sense of belonging to a community has become one of the reasons people choose to stay or find their way back after years away. As the sun slowly sets over the Atlantic grasslands, the final light of day turns the stone walls golden. Sheep quietly make their way back to the barns, while smoke once again rises from chimneys scattered among the countryside. Life in Ireland continues much as it always has, slowly but never standing still. In truth, what makes Ireland beautiful is not only its endless green fields, dramatic cliffs, or windswept coastlines. What truly makes this island special is its people. People who have learned to live in harmony with nature, preserve tradition in the midst of modern life, and always place their communities at the heart of everything they do. Because in the end, home is not a perfect place. Home is the place where, no matter how far you travel, you always know there will be a road that leads you back.